Build Your Business listeners. This is Matt Reynolds, your host for the podcast, and you are listening to what we are calling the legacy episodes. And really, these are the pre-episodes that really led to this podcast, the Build Your Business podcast. This is really my life's work and my brother's life's work in building your business. And so they were originally published in the Barbell Logic podcast as part of the Principles or Coaching Success series, but really touch on similar topics to the Build Your Business podcast: how to improve your productivity, how to set and accomplish your goals, deprioritize urgent tasks, to focus on what is most important to you, and most importantly, to become a better person and leader and business owner overall. I'm proud to bring you these podcasts. Again, many years of life's work, several years of podcasts, and several decades of business ownership. Hope you enjoy them and learn from them. You're listening to Barbell Logic, brought to you by Barbell Logic Online Coaching, where each week we take a systematic walk through strength training and the refining power of voluntary hardship. You're listening to another Barbell Logic podcast. This is a Principles episode. I'm here with my brother Chris, and we had talked a little bit about personality tests, I think, a couple weeks ago, and we talked about the three kind of big ones right now that are out, which is the Myers-Briggs, the Enneagram, and the Understand Myself. And we're going to just spend a couple episodes going through those, not a ton of time, but because understandmyself.com is a little more in-depth and there's a little more to it, we are going to talk, and we're just going to kind of compare. And let me just say, starting off, I'm actually a little nervous about this. And part of it is, and it's the Barbell Logic podcast. I own the Barbell Logic company. And so it's kind of vulnerable to talk about where these things are. And, I think for most people that take this, were you surprised about how high or low you were on any of, don't give specifics yet, but just in general about how high or low you were about some of the things?
Yeah, there were a few that when I looked at it, I was like, oh, okay.
Right.
I mean, it makes sense, I guess, but...
So I've had several members of my staff take this. My wife has taken it. I've actually had my 15-year-old daughter take it. And I don't know if I've ever had anybody take understandmyself.com's personality test. By the way, it's not sponsored. We don't have any relationship with them. I think Jordan Peterson has something to do with this. I know he's a very political figure. Whether you agree with him or not actually doesn't matter. It's just a personality test, right? So this isn't like something that skews towards his political background or anything. It's a pretty good personality test. And what I found, and I bet you would say the same thing, is when you take all three of these, nothing stands out as being completely different from the other. Like they all sort of coincide. There's sort of this continuity across all three of these personality tests. Is that fair?
Definitely. Mm-hmm.
Like I didn't come up as extremely empathetic in one and very low empathy in the other. Like it was all really just they're the same.
They're pretty close.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So so when you take this Understand Myself, is it 100 questions? Do you remember? It's been a little bit since I've taken it. Somewhere around.
Yeah. So I took mine this morning, and I think it was pretty close to 100 questions. I think that's about right.
And it's sort of simple. It's a question that says, give me like an example. It presents hey, how much time do you spend worrying about other people's feelings on a scale of 1 to 5, if I remember right? 1 is like, I don't really think that's about that at all, and 5, a whole bunch.
I think that's like the Likert. I think it's like the Likert scale or something similar, which is just like, strongly disagree, disagree, neutral, agree, strongly agree.
Okay, got it. So this will be interesting because there's so much about us that is similar, but I think there's quite a bit that's different, but we're going to find out right now. So the first thing, the first sort of trait that it talks about is agreeableness. Mm-hmm. What were you in agreeableness?
I was 46th percentile.
Yes, that surprises me. No, it doesn't surprise me. I was in the 3rd percentile. Now, 3rd percentile, that means that not like the 3rd percentile high, the 3rd percentile low. I am not agreeable. I mean, when I first took this, I was like, oh, I don't think I'm very agreeable, but I don't think I'm 3rd percentile. Like there is another guy that's on this podcast sometimes that I would say is significantly lower than me on the agreeable scale, and it ain't you. So, I'm like, Hambrick's got to be negative on the agreeable scale. Like he loves getting in arguments. I don't feel like I'm that way, but this thing, it says I'm less agreeable than 96 out of 100 people.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that's probably that's probably true. Uh, and again, I think I've taken the test twice. I took it several years ago, and the numbers really came out almost identical. I think it's important to know these things where you're like, boy, I'm really low here. I better surround. One, it's something I better work on, and two, it's I better surround myself with people who are better at this than me and make me better. Which I think
I'm probably going to say something that's a little bit controversial about some of these things too, which is I don't focus a lot of attention on trying to shore up the ones where I feel like I'm maybe weak.
Sure.
I have a tendency to sort of lean in the direction of this is probably close to set in stone. I can adjust it a bit, but I like what you said before about surrounding yourself with people who are very strong in that. I think complementing yourself with people who are naturally good at it is a very good choice. Spending a lot of time working on your weaknesses, there's a fair amount that I've read that basically says, yeah, maybe spend a lot more time on the things where you're good because you're just going to do you're just going to do infinitely better in that space. So I like to be aware of it. I think it's important to be aware of it, especially for your relationships with other people in the world. But some of it's just knowing I just wasn't born with this.
Well, and some of it, like I think you mentioned in the previous episode, is that often the things that you're very low in are sort of the antithesis of the things you're very high in. And so the places where, especially if you can look back and you would consider yourself a generally successful person by however you define that, you've probably achieved a lot of that success because of your strengths. And also, and if the weaknesses weren't a weakness, the strength wouldn't be as strong as a strength either, and you might not have the same success. And so a lot of it is just like you said, it's who you are. So I think about I haven't watched them in a few years, but years ago I really liked watching the CrossFit games, and it would be interesting watching the people that were kind of top 5, top 10 in the CrossFit games. Like I can remember, Brooke Wells she's a Missouri girl. She went to University of Missouri, and she's super strong. She's probably the strongest or one of the strongest female CrossFitters, but she wasn't great at like running marathons or running through the woods or big long, like triathlon type stuff. And so she spent a whole year working on that stuff and not focusing on strength very much, and came back and did worse at the CrossFit games because she neglected her strengths to focus on her weaknesses. And part of it is like, if I remember correctly, the point scale is actually loaded towards the top. So if you're the strongest person out there, you need to go out there and get first, and maybe you are in the bottom quarter of the distance stuff. So she got to the point where now she's just in the bottom half of the distance stuff, but now she took 5th or 6th in the strength. She actually lost points out of the deal. She could have got 100 points and won the whole thing. So anyway,
this actually that topic, by the way, is closely related to a topic we will address at some other time too, which is staying inside of your circle of competence in other areas like investing, which is something I study a lot. And so I think that's one of the reasons why I'm a little more apt to say stay in your circle of competence and just know what you suck at.
Right. Well, and it comes back to our last episode that we talked about, which was just being brutally self-honest. Some of this is understanding, like, you just need to know this is who you are. And it doesn't mean like, I don't get in an argument with my wife or my kids and be like, God damn it, I'm 3% agreeableness and 5% compassion. Don't you know that I can't really be compassionate or agreeable with you? Like, there isn't that. You don't stand on, hey, this is just who I am, as I'm a non-agreeable person. Like, that doesn't give me an excuse to not try to work through and resolve and reconcile relationships. I think it does matter for relationships. But I also think it matters to understand that honesty matters, to be like, this is okay. This is a struggle for me. I'm going to have to if I'm going to reconcile the relationship, I need to recognize that this is going to be a weakness, and it's going to take probably a little more work on my end on this part.
Definitely.
So compassion, number 2.
21st percentile.
Okay, fairly low. I can see that. I know you're higher than me. That's a little lower than I expected you to be. I'm in the 5th percentile. I'm slightly more compassionate than I am agreeable.
Oh man, I love that. There's a section on this that gives you a sentence that says, much less compassionate people are not primarily oriented towards the problems of others, people, or other living things. It's funny because when you look at some of the empathy stuff for me, mine's super high. Yeah. I actually think those two feed on each other in my personality, not necessarily for other people's, but I am so affected by other people's emotions, and that we talked about this before. I feel them, that it's miserable for me to participate with others in their own stuff, their own difficulties. At least to an extent. I can't do it for very long periods of time, and I certainly don't seek it out. And so I think part of it is I just have to stay away from it because it affects me so much. I don't like it.
This is an interesting one because when I've talked to especially my leadership team about this, they think that I am significantly higher compassion than what I get labeled as here or tested as here. And I think for me, I've talked about this before, for people who are in my circle of trust that I consider family or very close friends, people that I very much care about, I'm actually super compassionate about the feelings that my wife has or my kids have or my leadership team on in the business or whatever, you or my close friends and my close family. But when I take these tests, I think I'm thinking about the public at large. Or I'm thinking about someone that I have who I would probably call an acquaintance, somebody who maybe I go to church with, but I'm not really close to, or like, my next door neighbor or something, like somebody that's next door to me. Mm-hmm. And I have exactly zero compassion for most of that, right? If that person is struggling with something, I'm just like, and what it comes down to, and we'll talk about this more when we get to like industriousness, is I'm just a goal-oriented person. I can't worry about your sickness or your illness or the fact that you didn't get your federal stimulus check or whatever. That doesn't help me reach the goals I'm trying to reach. And so, it is what it is. It's a low point for me. But I'm, I've learned how to manage that. I think certainly we'll always continue to work on it. But third one is politeness.
I was 76th on that one.
Interesting. Fourth. It's actually a little higher than I thought it would be for me. It's the fourth percentile.
This is wild,
man. You've always known,
hey,
I've got high scores coming. Stay with me. Listen, this is the way I am on all these personality tests. There is nothing in the middle. I am super strong in certain places and crazy weak.
Yeah.
If I'm not careful, I am the kind of person who loves to tell people how they could do it better. And that's not very, that's kind of, that sounds like I don't walk in and I don't look and tell somebody how they did it wrong without being provoked or asked. But when somebody tells me, there are often times when you get in conversations where somebody expresses their struggle. And what happens is I'm not really compassionate about their struggle. I'm immediately thinking about how to fix it. And thinking about it, but they're not telling me to actually learn how to fix it. They're telling me to kind of, they actually want empathy and compassion.
Yeah.
And I'm not wired to give that very well. And so I'm like, oh, let me fix your problem. Your problem is X and you can fix it. And by the way, I'm right most of the time. The problem is they're not in a position to hear it. So it falls on deaf ears.
Yeah.
I certainly think you're more polite than me.
Well, the test says so. I think it's a funny thing because I would say, well, internally, as we discussed in the last one, my compassion is actually pretty low. I am so attuned to the way that other people are going to hear what I say. I've usually sort of I've run it in my head as a preprocessor before I ever get it out there, and I know how they're going to take it. And I'm right fairly frequently there as well on how they're going to perceive what I say. And so I think that's where the politeness goes up for me, is because I had just, again, I just think I was born with this. I don't think I did anything to deserve it, but I have the ability to deliver a message in a way that has the least amount of friction possible and potentially deliver a message that can actually be useful to the person on the other side. At least I think that's what it is. I hope it's what it is.
For me, on the opposite end of the spectrum, I'm pretty much tone deaf. Now, it's funny because I've been able to run a pretty successful company. And so I certainly, if I think about it for a while and I chew on it, but I spend a lot of time getting a lot of feedback from people like my wife and Nikki Sims, our head of HR, and my editor-in-chief to help me write things. It's pretty rare that I would put out anything written or spoken at this point that I haven't run through someone else. The podcast is probably the most gritty, edgy thing we have. That's not true. It's definitely the most gritty, edgy thing we have. And it's because it doesn't run through that filter.
It's unfiltered.
Yeah. And even from an early age, like I had the ability to stick my foot in my mouth. Sort of always have. And I'm always like, wait, whoa, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. I didn't, and so that's something that I've struggled with growing up. So, okay, thank God I got a high scale coming up here. So conscientiousness, where are you?
59th.
Whoa, way lower than I expected.
Yep.
I'm 98th.
Man, that's impressive. Let's read through this one and see if we can get to the heart of what conscientiousness means in this context.
You are exceptionally high in conscientiousness, which is the primary dimension of dutiful achievement in the Big Five personality trait scientific model. Conscientiousness is a measure of obligation, attention to detail, hard work, persistence, cleanliness, especially my butthole, efficiency and adherence to rules, standards and processes. I mean, bro, it was like they used me as the model.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, from the time you were a kid, I mean, I would say nothing about that has changed since the time that I could recognize that you were a human that made independent choices. So
yeah, no, the hard work part for me only has come in since I have found the thing that I love to do or the business that I own. You know, back when I was the cart boy at Kmart, I wasn't super conscientious. I wasn't super into like hard work because I recognized that I was never shooting to be the assistant manager or manager or regional manager or anything above that at Kmart. I recognized what that job was. That was a paycheck for me for a year or 2 years to help pay for gas in my car.
Yeah, yeah. The list they have here, that it's a measure of obligation, attention to detail, hard work, persistence. I can pick the ones that I am literally terrible at and don't care at all.
Which is what?
Like, for example, I have almost no sense of obligation whatsoever. So where other people are like, no, I feel very obligated that I have to do this thing for these people and like whatever. I'm like, I have none of that. Zero obligation in my world. Attention to detail is okay depending on the context, but certainly not always there. Adherence to the rules is a straight up zero for me. I put zero. I
always have
the
been,
rules.
by the way.
The rules matter not
rebellious.
to me. Don't care.
I actually think as I get older, and maybe with some additional success, I have less adherence to rules. I think as you get older, especially if you've had enough success or you've got even, quote unquote, kind of fuck you money, which by the way, I don't have, but you do have, is that you're just like, I don't, and it's and Hamburg has it too. You're kind of like, look, man, what's the fallout here for me if I say no? Like, and that also is probably tied to that adherence to the rules is also probably tied to obligation. How obligated are you to follow the rules?
Yep. And to authority a little bit. My wife is literally the opposite. She compliments me very well here. She is a rule follower.
Sure.
Whatever the rules are, she is doing them to the T. That's the way it is. Those were the rules. I always say, who made those rules? And why should I trust that person?
Right.
And I'm like, I don't really care.
Right.
So just not a rule follower.
So interestingly enough, my wife compliments me extremely well on the first three that we talked about. On those kind of, she is way off the charts high on compassion and agreeableness and things like that. She is actually she's slightly above average on conscientiousness. Kaylin, on the other hand, and we'll get there here in a minute. Kaylin is also very low on That's my 15-year-old daughter. She is also very low on the agreeableness and compassion and whatnot, and is like a 4 on conscientiousness. Now she's 15, and I expect that to get better, but it's pretty damn low. So, all right.
I did notice, by the way, when I took these personality tests, some of the ones I've taken before have changed quite a bit over the last 10 years for me. Like Myers-Briggs especially.
Yeah, I think how I would, if I had taken this at 18 or 20, I think it would actually be significantly different. So, industriousness.
85th.
99.
Yeah.
Again, like if conscientiousness isn't exactly me, industriousness is. As a matter of fact, probably the majority of my personality conflicts that I have are due to my extremely high industriousness. I'm like, let's fucking get the work done, people. What are we doing? We've talked about this before. I have the ability to focus and get crap done, and you do too. And most of the people I surround myself with, certainly in the business world, do. My family does not, and I struggle with it some. And I think in a growing tech company, which I consider our business a tech company, I'm sure a lot of people don't. Certainly your company definitely was a tech company. Industriousness is incredibly important because you're moving at the speed of light. And I remember Eric Schmidt talking about the CEO, or just recent ex-CEO, I think, right, of Google, talked about one of your jobs when you run obviously we're not Google, but a very fast moving tech business. as a CEO, you better make sure nobody's waiting on you for anything. It actually comes back to the obligation because you're at the top, and if people wait on you, the whole business stops. And so you learn how to be very industrious and be able to get things done quickly so that because if people are waiting on me, nothing moves. The train stops.
Yeah.
And so, but I've been that way for a long time.
I think I'm a little more driven. I saw one of the surprises in here for me is sort of around related to creativity. And I think part of the thing that lowers mine just a hair, and again, I'm 85th percentile on this, so it's still extremely high. But I sometimes will weight creativity and passion for a thing in a moment over industriousness. So if there's something I need to get done, but there's something that today I'm especially passionate about, I will sometimes choose to do the thing I'm passionate about because I know the energy is high, the motivation is high, and I have a tendency to create something amazing when that happens. It's a rare circumstance. And so that probably knocked me down a few points on this one.
Yeah, it makes sense. And if you read this, I think a lot about, I think this explains your wife a lot here too. Live to work and always have to be doing something useful. Like more than almost anybody I know, your wife is somebody who can't sit still. Like she's always doing something.
I cannot get her to watch a movie with me where she actually stays focused on the movie for long enough to know what's going on. I'm having to fill her in on the
next
details,
here
which
is
is fine.
They do not at all like to sit around. They're extremely dutiful, right?
Her hands are moving. She's doing something.
That's right.
Yep.
So they always finish what they start. They do it on a schedule. Again, that's totally me. And by the way, that is my industriousness is the way I keep control in a chaotic life.
Yeah,
that's what it is.
That's what Jenny does too.
I need the schedule, do the thing, get up early. I've got the system. Like you could if I was on the Truman Show or something, you'd see me get up every single morning at the exact same time, go down. I start the water on the coffee pot. After I start the water on the coffee, whatever it is, the kettle, right? So it takes a while to heat up. While it's heating up, I let the dogs out. I feed the dogs. I give the dogs water. I go back. I make the coffee. I walk in my room. I sit down. The first thing I do is pull up TrueCoach and I see how many notifications I have, and then I get depressed, and then I start knocking the thing out. That's what I do. All right. So next one is
I've got to ask you something on this one. I wonder if it affects it. How do you feel about having a plan made for a day? Like we're going to go at 2:00 today. We're going to go and we're going to do a trail walk, or we're going to do something, and then just changing and then just not doing it.
It mostly completely wrecks me.
It makes me. I have fewer things in life that make me happier
than doing that very thing.
Than having a plan and just throwing it
all away. So now
my favorite thing to do, I was like, my time was filled and now it's not filled and I am so much happier.
Sure.
Which drives my wife a little crazy because when she sets a 2:00,
she wants it.
God damn it, we're doing the 2:00, and for me, it's like, I just got more coffee and reading time. Yay.
So there are, certainly there are a lot of things that I have to do in my daily life that I'm not super crazy about having to do, those kind of urgent things that are maybe less important, like those phone calls, especially right now, all the Zoom calls and things. If the Zoom calls get canceled, I'm like, yes, right? Like that's nice. I've tried to, this is a great example. I'm glad you asked about this. If we go on like a family vacation and we have sort of a plan for the day, especially if we're in a city or we go to Disney or Universal or something where you're like, oh, you've got kind of this thing mapped out. I'm like, we got to ride this thing and this thing and this thing and this thing. And there are times when I can think about that. I'm like, you know what? It's family vacation. Like if my girls don't care, I shouldn't care either. And if I go into it, so the plan now is to not care. And if I plan to not care, if I plan to just be like, it's okay, I can just sort of be aloof about the whole thing, then I'm okay with it. It doesn't wreck me. But if I had like a specific plan, we have to be on this ride at 9 a.m. when the park opens to not have to wait in line, and my family's 5 minutes late, then it's a problem. I'll tell you a story about me this morning. You talk about changing the schedule. We were supposed to record this earlier this morning, and then last night I forgot. I had to have my house appraised this morning, and somehow it didn't get on the calendar. So Rachel forgot that we had mixed the Google. She went back and put it on the iPhone Apple calendar and forgot to put it on the Google calendar, so it didn't show up. So I was like, dang it. So then I'm like, okay, well, we need to make sure the house, and our house is clean all the time and is in pretty good shape, but I wanted to make sure it was in exceptional shape. And so I had a whole plan out. So I got up early this morning and broke down some videos, and then I created a step-by-step list of what rooms that we were going to clean and whose responsibilities they were so that everything could be done by 9 a.m. when the appraisers got here. And when my family got up and they came downstairs, and they were all like bedhead and in pajamas, and they were like, "Why do we have to get up so early?" I was like, "Because we got to get the house ready for the appraisal, and they didn't want to." And then the guy showed up 15 minutes early, and the house wasn't ready, and I almost had a heart attack. I wanted to kill everyone. Which in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But because it didn't go according to plan. So very similar to industriousness, or certainly connected to industriousness, is orderliness. I bet you're a little low.
25th.
25th?
25th.
Wow. Slow. I'm 90th.
Yeah. I've known this about myself for a really long time. It was not a shock to me to see it when they have the words in here. People moderately low in orderliness are neither disturbed nor disgusted by mess and chaos. They tend simply not to notice such things. They see the world in shades of gray rather than black and white, and are non-judgmental in their attitudes towards themselves and others. They rarely use schedules, lists, or routines, and even if they plan, tend to not implement those plans. There's like a lot of that.
By the way, I'm actually anxious. As you read that, it raises my anxiety and makes my blood pressure go up.
This goes back to the idea that I value free time and the creativity that causes for me, which actually always is creativity and output in something, right? Could be writing, reading, stock investment ideas, various things like that. That happens for me in the space and silence of time to think, essentially. Sure. And the rest of the things I can just kind of ignore. And this is one place where, again, when it comes to like having a spouse, like my wife, she would be 99 on this. So she always notices the mess before I do. There is a point at which the mess bothers me. We have 3 kids, obviously, and I like it starts getting irritating. And when it does, I'll go in and clean things up and get it taken care of, or make them do it. Usually I make them do it. But Jenny will just go around sort of constantly, and she's a busybody. She wants to do stuff. But this is one place where there is at times a bit of friction because of that difference.
Sure, I can see that. I think my wife is fairly orderly. I think she's higher than you, and don't think I'm quite as high as Jenny. But a lot of it for me is an orderly home or an orderly place feels like solace to me. Like I can't read in a messy room. The room has to be orderly first for me to sit down and read. So if I go up in my library and there's dirty cups that I had cocktails in or something sitting there, I'm like, I got to take care of that before I open the book. So that's certainly a place that we don't have a lot of friction there, other than I'm always amazed at my daughters. We were talking about this morning, that my daughters, we have our kids. First off, your kids are younger than my kids, right? Your oldest kid is 10 days older than my youngest kid. Yep. And so my kids are older. My kids trash their room every single day. And we make them clean it up every day. And they work hard cleaning their rooms. And then 40 minutes later, they trash their room. And this past week, I've talked about this on the podcast a couple of times. We planted a raised bed garden. And I had my girls work on it, and our sister's kids, that we call them the twins, Emma and Sadie. And the 4 of these girls, they worked their butts off. Like they used the pickaxe and the hoe, and they brought in soil, and it was tough work. And I paid them well for it. But it was the hardest manual labor I would say any of them had ever done in their whole life. And they looked at it and they're proud of this thing that they built, right? And they go back to their rooms and they trash their rooms, and they clean up their rooms, they trash their rooms, they clean up their rooms, they trash their rooms. I brought them down today and I was like, hey, the thing for the appraisal was a lot harder than it had to be because your rooms were trashed, even though you had to clean it up yesterday. The rooms have to be 100% clean once a week for the housekeeper to go in there and like vacuum and stuff. I said, it would basically, what you're doing is as if we went out right now and we dug up the garden and we threw all the shit all over the place, and every day we started over and replanted the whole garden again. That's literally what you do with your rooms. And you could actually see for the first time ever, it was like the light bulb went off. I was like, how about you just don't trash your rooms until Jesus comes back? Don't ever trash your room again. Like, it's so much worse. Like, why would you trash your room every day?
True.
So anyway, orderliness, big deal. All right, so then they start to get these other pieces. We'll bust through these pretty quick. They start to become kind of smaller personality things that sort of support the previous big things that we were looking at. So the next one is extroversion, right? This is where we'll be different.
I was at 60th on extroversion, which is higher than I expected.
I'm 93rd. I'm very extroverted. I don't think we don't even have to talk about that too much for me. I think that you are the definition of the introverted, extroverted type of person. I think when you're in a room with you and a group of people, you can control a room well. You can lead the conversation. I think you're confident and you hold yourself well. I've told people this story before. Like, you can go to business parties and you can do the thing and schmooze and shake hands and drink the champagne and do the stuff. And then you have to go back to your hotel room and curl up into a fetal position and suck your thumb for like 10 hours.
That's right. It's exactly that way.
And so I think that's why you're right in the middle. You're not truly introverted. You can do extroversion well, but I think it robs you of energy. And I think for me, being around people gives me energy. I think that's probably a good way to say it. Enthusiasm.
This was maybe a bit shocking. Mine is low, 21st percentile.
Oh, that doesn't surprise me at all. You're not really like I'm 75th percentile.
Oh, that's right. This is an excitable. This is
that's
okay.
right. I get real excited about stuff. I'm the people talk about the Reynolds exaggeration. I've got a guy that works for me. His name is Dan Flanick. He's been on the podcast lots of times before. He runs our youth barbell club. He's just a ball of fire all the time. This guy Dan would be 99 percentile on this.
Yeah.
He's all in all the time. Let's do it. Let's light this candle. And I'm a lot. As a matter of fact, would have been higher 10 years ago, and now I'm old, and so I can't be quite as enthusiastic. But you're chill, man. You're like Grandpa Lynn.
Yeah, I don't. Nothing rouses me all that much, and I have really. I'll say this, and at some point, I'm sure we'll loop back around to this idea, but I actually think this has helped me out a lot as an investor. When the rest of the world is flipping shit, I just don't.
Sure.
I mean, I look at it and I'm like, yeah. I don't think things are quite as extreme. So I don't have high highs. I don't have low lows. Sort of live right in the middle of that, and it's helped me because I mean I don't feel like any of the extreme emotional reactions have any effect on my behaviors.
Sure. Yeah, I wish I was a little more like that. I can actually be like that out of. I had to learn how to be that way back years ago when I played poker. You can't really be. Yeah. You're just playing a math game. Right. And if you play the math game right and you still lose the hand, then that was the luck piece. It wasn't the strategy. And for investing now, it's the same sort of thing. Like, I'm the same way. I don't really get riled up about, the craziness of the stock market or whatever. I'm pretty chill when it comes to finances. I think I get a little bit overloaded, both in family stuff and in business stuff. But I come back to a lot. I remember Brett McKay told me a couple years ago, going into a very hard 2019, Brett said, things are never as bad as they seem, and things are never as good as they seem.
That's right.
And when you could actually keep that in perspective, you're like, you know what? In fact, my experience tells me that all of that is true. Things, in fact, are never as bad as they seem or as good as they seem.
That's right.
Assertiveness. Where are you there?
88th.
Okay. That's actually a little higher than I think I would have expected you to be, although you are when you get your mind on something that is, I know I'm right about this thing, you are a teacher and you can convince well. I'm 96th, 88, is that where you were? That's probably 88. A little healthier. If I'm not careful, my assertiveness can turn into manipulation. It can turn into my least favorite term over the past 3 years, which is called gaslighting. I hate that word, that term. Yep. But if I'm not careful, it can turn into that. I can be very assertive to get my way. Kaylin very high on this as well.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me.
Anything else there? That's about right.
I don't think so.
Neuroticism.
Yeah, that's right.
Neuroticism.
18th.
Damn it. 34. I was like, I'm very low on the neurotic scale. You're lower, but that makes sense. I think neither one of us are very neurotic, and I can see how you'd be uber low there.
Yeah, I don't see anything else to talk about in that particular one. I'm glad I'm low on the neuroticism.
I don't have the details on the next several. You probably do, so you might look and see if there's anything we want to touch on there. But withdrawal.
Yeah, so let's just read a little piece of this. Individuals moderately low in withdrawal tend not to suffer from nor be impeded by anticipatory anxiety. They can handle new, uncertain, unexpected, threatening, complex situations. So I was a 36th percentile on that one. 8, yeah, that doesn't surprise me. My anticipatory anxiety has actually been enormously problematic over the course of my life when I am in extended periods of stress. Yeah. So inside, when I was working, it was obviously, it was a constant battle. And so I think some of this is probably related to the fact that my life circumstances have changed and I'm just a lot more chilled out now. But anticipatory anxiety for me, historically, under high levels of stress, has been a significant problem.
But you didn't. I think part of that is, so that's maybe the root cause, and then the effect of that for a lot of people that would be high in withdrawal is that they withdraw. That's the idea. And you didn't tend to do that, right? You would be under extreme anxiety, but you didn't tend to like withdraw out of and like go lay in bed for 3 days. That wasn't typically your...
No, I would always engage with the problem and try to solve it. I did try to withdraw from the stressor so that I could solve the problem. So I sort of knew how to, give myself some distance. If you're in the middle of being blasted by something, it's almost impossible to focus and get work done. So for me, it was really just a coping mechanism to get to focus as fast as possible.
I think for me, I'm wired for risk. I think I like it. I wish I didn't. I want to not like it. Risk does stress me. I do get stressed, but I don't really get anxious about I get anxiety sometimes, but it's not about the anticipation of the bad thing that could possibly happen in the future. That's just not the thing that causes anxiety. And I never withdraw. I'm never one of those people that matter of fact, my capacity to work goes up exponentially under those circumstances. Well, we better hunker down and do the thing.
I choose to work.
That's right.
Yeah. And I work my way through it.
Because working through it is the way I don't be stressed out. Like I don't ever, if I'm everybody's done this before. Like you're super stressed out and you're just like, you know what? I just need to like lay down and take a nap. Like everybody's done that a couple times before. I never wake up from the nap feeling less stressed out. Like I wake up and the problem's still there. For me, if the problem is hanging over me, it must be dealt with. And so, here we go. Volatility. This is
9th,
72nd.
Oh, wow, we're really on two different spectrums.
It's completely, and that's exactly who we are, right? I'm definitely more volatile. Definitely have more of a temper than I wish I did. I control it pretty well, and I certainly am never violent or anything, but I can yell if I need to. And,
this is one of those that I don't know that this has always treated me well. I've thought about this one a little bit. It's whenever there would be times in our company where I had to fire people. I mean, that's just sort of the way, that's how business works. And the rest of the employees, if I was the one, if it happened because I finally was like, that is enough. Enough is enough. It's like it sent shockwaves through the company.
Right.
They were like, if Chris is upset at you, man, you must have done something wrong.
Right.
Like badly wrong, because that does not happen. Normally, I mean, I'm super slow to get upset. I'm super slow to have, and sometimes in my life, people have actually treated me in a way where I could tell they believed that I was weak because of that.
Right.
In reality, I did not feel that way. I just don't have a strong emotional response to stuff like that. And so, it hasn't always had a positive effect, but I like the fact that nothing really rocks me very much, which has been helpful.
I think on the other end of the spectrum for me is that I think that some volatility certainly has had some indirect positive effect on my life. The fact that my kids, or if my nieces come over, there's a sleepover or something, everybody's just a little bit scared of me. Not a lot scared, but a little bit scared. And
that's the flip side.
They tighten up the discipline. But on the downside for me is I don't know if I have ever had a positive outcome, a positive direct outcome of volatility, especially although including my family life, but especially in business life. The world we live in now, as a matter of fact, I can remember, this won't even be about Barbell Logic. I remember when I owned Strong, and all of my employees were like college age boys. Men, I think they call them men, but they were basically boys. And they were all millennials. And now I understand that college age boys are not millennials or Gen Zs, but this was my first exposure to millennials. And they would do something stupid as an employee, a low paid hourly wage, $10 an hour employee. And I would get mad at them, and I would discipline them or chastise them. I mean, I wouldn't yell at them, or I don't berate people. I don't cuss at them. I don't call them names. But it was just like, like, what the hell were you thinking? Like this, you're better than that sort of stuff. And I can remember they'd be like, you can't talk to me that way. You're not my dad.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm your motherfucking boss. Right? By the way, that's what volatility sounds like. And it never goes well. And I think that I would be a much better boss in 1957 than today, because you could yell at people in
I think that's
1957 and, you put me on the line at Ford, I'll get some shit done. But now I have to be again, I've got to run everything through, and I've got to soften everything I say. And and so it's the opposite. I think that people see me with a lot of strength, and like, the guy's he's a little bit scary, but I got to soften all of the edges. And I think there were times where you probably had to harden up a little bit in your.
That's right. It was exactly the opposite direction for me. It was, I lived life in a way where people felt very comfortable bringing their concerns and problems to me, and they knew they weren't going to get judged in the process. It's just not the kind of person I am. My wife stepped in 2 nights ago. Everybody's home on quarantine or whatever, and my wife had to step in for my kids. I was telling my kids at bedtime, guys, I need you to calm down, be quiet and try to get some sleep. And they basically ignored everything that I said. They just, almost like they weren't listening to me at all. And that's where Jenny piped up. Ooh, she got mad. And she was like, listen, a lot of people's dads are not like your dad. If you want them to become that way, keep acting like this. And so, even with my children, I've noticed that it was the same effect with many of my employees, where I would go from 0,0,0,0,0 to nuclear at some point. Like, okay, that's enough. And at this point, you've lost your job, and we're gonna talk about it. It's a mess. With my kids, it's a really, really rare circumstance, but when it happens, man, they know they've set me off.
Yep, that's good. All right, 3 left. Openness to experience. Do you have any details on this? Like, what is?
I was 87th.
Is that openness to new experiences? Is that what this is? Remind me.
Yeah, I think so. I think people with high levels of openness to experience are much more likely than average to be characterized by others as smart, creative, exploratory, intelligent, and visionary. They are highly interested in learning and continually to acquire new abilities and skills.
Man, it's funny. When I hear that, I think, like, that sounds like things that I'm interested in. I was 23rd percentile.
Yeah, it's curious and exploratory, which I think part of the thing there is also, and we talked about this specifically in the last podcast, is for reasons, again, nothing that I did, something I was born with. I think I have zero fear about learning or finding something out that is the antithesis of something that I previously believed or whatever. I see that as a growth opportunity. I love it. I enjoy that. I like the change in it too. And so I imagine that's where a lot of that is coming from on the openness to experience. I think I'm just not afraid.
If you asked me, do you really want to know the truth about religion and politics? I'd be like, no, I think I'd rather just keep believing what I believe.
Yeah. I mean, and that's probably pretty normal. Yeah. I just, for reasons I don't understand, I would always answer that the opposite. I'm like, I want to know. And in fact, I would prefer to know about all manner of things that are probably incredibly uncomfortable for most people. Sure. And I think most people would prefer to stay comfortable and not deal with the challenge of it. I just want to know the truth.
The crazy thing is, I like the idea of all of that. I like what you say. Yeah. I'm in. But like, really, I think when I'm confronted with those sort of things, I'm like, I'm kind of set in my ways. I think maybe that's a good way to say it. I think I'm set in my ways about these things. I've got sort of strong opinions about almost everything, and I really don't think I'm super judgmental of other people who don't necessarily land that direction. But you're not going to change my mind. Right. So that's maybe a better way of saying it. So, Intellect. Come on, baby. Come on.
89th.
God damn it. 86th. But I beat you on the ACT a little bit.
You did. You beat me by a full point on the ACT. We were so close to each other on the ACT. It was ridiculous.
That's funny. All right. So there's probably nothing there. Openness. This is the other one I was trying to remember. Is openness like creativity? I'm trying to remember what the openness piece is.
The closest synonym for openness, rather than openness to experience, which encompasses openness and intellect, is creativity. Okay. Moderately open, creative people find beauty important.
Perfect. Guess what I am?
I'm not going to guess. You tell me.
First percentile. The lowest of the whole thing.
75th for me.
Yeah, I think that's a really good. I have known that I have no ability to create. Whatever ability I had to create, I don't remember if I've ever talked about this on the podcast. What did I want to become my whole life growing up? You remember?
An architect.
So for me, I saw architecture in a very logical, systematic way. So even when I created buildings, homes, bridges, whatever, go to architecture school, it was still very like systematic and progressive. That's the way this whole podcast is. Like, I've created a podcast that's still based on sort of engineering concepts of systematic progression. And I don't have an ounce of, I hear symphonies or I see art and I love it. Actually, I love that stuff. I love music. I love art. I love fine arts. I love great food. But I hear those symphonies and I'm like, I cannot even begin to comprehend how a brain could come up with that.
Yeah.
It doesn't even make sense to me. Like it's like I'm an alien to it. I just don't have any of that in me.
I don't think I realized for a very long time how much of this was driving my personality, but it is related to that whole thing of when you manage creatives, as we had to at Brightcore, you recognize that you can't turn creativity off and on. It's not like, okay, we talked about schedule before,
Sure.
and I'm the same way, by the way. I still wake up at 5:00 in the morning and make my coffee at the same order that I do, sit down with my book, start blasting through my book, whatever. But with creatives, it's kind of like when the moment hits you, it hits you. And if that's in the middle of dinner, if that's in the middle of doing something else you were supposed to do, you have finite numbers of those when they hit.
Sure.
And if this is the kind of personality you have, you better capitalize on it when it happens. And I've had moments in my career where that was the case, especially in programming, when something would hit me like freaking flux capacitor for Doc Brown. And I would be like, shit, I need to be on this now.
Right.
And I will drop everything, no matter what the schedule is, I'll drop everything. And I'll put my earplugs in and I will start hacking away at some solution because I can see it from beginning to end the second it hits. And so I think that's the level of creativity for me. Music has always been one too. I've always been a fairly active musician. As far as art goes, maybe not quite so much. But I think creativity is a pretty big driving force for me. The biggest way that I think that played out for me, and I had recommended this to several people that I worked with, was don't be so driven by your schedule. Schedule's important, and being able to get up early in the morning and do the things you need to do, or for late night owls, to kick it off, late at night. But don't be so driven by that when you get that spark of creativity, a creative idea, that you've left no space in your schedule to be able to go do it. Because, man, that's where some of the most brilliant work comes from.
Yeah, no, that's all really good. And I do feel like I've got a lot of those. I've had very creative moments in business, which I just think they're still wired in sort of a logical sort of system. And I'm the same way. Like when I get my mind, all of a sudden things are like, whoa, we could do this. I remember when I considered the idea of the massive expansion of online coaching, and I was driving to Tennessee, and I ended up getting my laptop out and putting it in the passenger seat, and I typed with my right hand while driving, typed ideas, and it was all, had all sorts of mistakes in it. And I got to Tennessee, and the first thing I did was call you, and I'm like, listen, I got this idea. We can expand online coaching, figured out how to scale. And that was it. And so I think the thing that I'm always careful with the schedule, or that I worry about, and maybe unnecessarily, is if you're not careful, you give people who are not wired for a schedule an excuse or a way out to just go play video games and smoke weed, masturbate. I'm like, if you're not going to stick to the schedule, it's because you're doing something creative that's valuable and that's important. It's just not urgent, and which is, I think, great. Replace some urgent stuff.
You got to learn to control
stuff,
that thing,
but don't replace the urgent stuff with worthless things. So.
Yeah, I think the place I'd put that at is passionate, creative work that actually adds value is so many times more valuable than white knuckle.
That's right.
Which is a term you use fairly frequently to describe, like, okay, I just need to hunker down and get it done, or whatever it is. Both of those things are important. You need to be able to do both, but the passion, when you're passionate about something, you'll work at 5 times the speed. It's crazy, and you can't put it down.
That's right.
I mean, I've had times where I literally could not put my laptop down. And I mean, I'm a early to bed, early to rise guy, but it's midnight and I'm not done. And I just keep going. I can't stop.
Yep.
So, it's been a valuable trait for me. And it can be useful.
Well, I think for me, my most productive and creative, the things that make the long-term difference in business, family, life for me, that when I really am able to focus on those important things, it happens often for me when I'm on vacation, when I've been able to unplug from the urgency, when I'm able to sort of outsource the urgency or take a small vacation from the urgency, so I don't have any of the urgent things. And maybe I'm just out, and my wife is, we're laying on a beach, and my wife is reading a book, and I'm just thinking, and my mind is allowed, it's free to be able to think through the big stuff because it's not bogged down by, it's not in bondage to the urgent. And so I had a buddy, but it was on the Principles podcast, Eric, that owns Beard Brand, and he had some incredible things happen. He just took a complete month off of work. They had a baby, and he was at home, and COVID was going around, so he decided to stay at home with his new baby and stay at home for a month and like not work at all for a month. And he had these incredible ideas about the business, and it's had an incredible impact on the business in the time that he just had to, because he wasn't doing the day-to-day operations.
I think that is very consistent with almost everyone I talk to who owns a business at that time is super helpful. One thing that's great about this test, by the way, and I hadn't taken this one before, and this relates to one of the podcasts we did earlier when we talked about the groups you feel like you belong to, especially if it's politically or religiously or whatever. In each of the categories, they tell you if liberals or conservatives are more or less of one or the other. And hopefully...
And sex, which is interesting too. Like men tend to be more this, and women tend to be... And again, remember, that's just nobody get all riled up about it. It's just middle of the bell curve stuff, right? So there are all outliers but yes.
That's right. But what I like is you will frequently notice that in different categories, you are either more liberal or more conservative, but you are rarely across the board a single thing. And it helps, I think, to give us a reasonable amount of compassion towards people that are not in our particular group, because we realize that, we're kind of in a little bit of both groups, which I would certainly say characterizes myself.
So there you go. There's the Understand Myself. Again, you should go take that if you haven't already. UnderstandMyself.com. I think it's $10. Was that right? Was it $10 to take?
10,
something like that?
$10.
The other two you can take for free. We'll talk about Myers-Briggs and Enneagram next week, and it's a little faster because there's less categories to be judged on. But you can see how you stack up. And again, it's one of those things. It's not a competition. It's not a test. It's just, it comes back to that radical self-honesty that we talked about a couple weeks ago of just understanding who you are, where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are, and being able to push in where you're strong and be able to understand where you're weak and try to surround yourself with other people that build you up. I think a lot of you will probably notice if you have your spouse, if you're in a healthy marriage, if you have your spouse take this as well, you'll notice the many places that you'll complement each other. Places where you are weak, they will be strong, and vice versa. And there'll be some places where both of you are strong or both of you are weak, and sometimes that can be interesting as well. And so that is it. So thank you for listening to another episode of the Barbell Logic podcast, the Principles Edition. We'll see you next Sunday, but before that, we'll see you tomorrow morning for a Barbell Logic. What do we call that shit? For a Barbell Logic content episode. We'll see you tomorrow.